It started like any other day in Washington. The lights in the hearing room buzzed softly, the cameras were lined up, and the air carried that strange mix of tension and routine that always surrounds political events. But nobody watching that morning knew that they were about to witness something unforgettable, something that would set social media on fire and leave one of Congress's most confident men sitting in silence. Mike Johnson was in his usual form, bold, loud, sure of himself. He had made a career out of speaking with certainty, the kind of certainty that fills a room even when the words don't hold much weight. He smiled as the broadcast began, already convinced he would dominate the conversation. But across from him sat someone very different, calm, focused, patient, Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine wasn't new to confrontation. She had been a lawyer before entering Congress, used to cross-examinations and courtroom pressure. She had faced judges, prosecutors, critics, and pundits. She knew how to listen, how to wait, and most of all, how to strike when it mattered. But that day she didn't plan to shout. She planned to show what real power looks like, not the kind that comes from volume, but the kind that comes from control. As the broadcast started, Johnson leaned forward with that practiced smile. He joked, he laughed, and then he crossed the line. With a smirk, he made a jab at Jasmine's law degree. The audience chuckled. The cameras kept rolling. For a moment, it looked like just another routine exchange, a man in power trying to turn confidence into comedy. But he had no idea how big that moment was about to become, because in that instant, the internet woke up. Clips began circulating within minutes. Someone posted the video to X, another shared it on Reddit, and before an hour had passed, the hashtag Crockett response was trending nationwide. People were tagging her, commenting, waiting. They wanted to see what she would say. But Jasmine Crockett didn't rush. She didn't post a statement or tweet a reaction. She did what few people in politics ever do. She waited. Waiting is a power move most people underestimate. Silence makes others nervous. It gives them time to replay their own words and realize what they sounded like. And that's exactly what happened to Mike Johnson. As the clip spread online, viewers began to hear his tone differently. What had sounded like humor in the room now came across as arrogance on screen. The laughter that once seemed playful now felt cruel. The tide was turning, and he didn't even realize it yet. Meanwhile, Jasmine stayed calm. Friends and colleagues texted her, urging her to respond. Reporters called. Producers asked her team for a comment. But she didn't say a word. Because Crockett understood something simple. Timing is everything. And when you let arrogance speak first, the truth doesn't need to rush. By the end of the day, the video had millions of views. Comment sections exploded with debates. Some defended Johnson, calling it harmless. Others saw it for what it was, another man trying to belittle a woman who refused to shrink. But no matter which side people were on, one thing was certain. Everyone was waiting for Jasmine. That night she sat at home, watching the coverage. News anchors replayed the clip again and again. Analysts discussed her education, her composure, her background. She didn't flinch. She knew exactly what was happening. The world was building anticipation for her next move. And when the world waits for you to speak, that's when you hold the real power. The next morning, Johnson walked into another interview. He laughed about the reaction, pretending it didn't bother him. But his eyes told a different story. You could see the unease, the flicker of doubt behind that practiced grin. His words stumbled just slightly, and that was enough for people to notice. Confidence can be faked, but control cannot. And Jasmine Crockett had all the control. Days passed, and the story kept growing. Late-night shows made jokes. Memes appeared everywhere. People began referring to her as the woman who made Congress hold its breath. Still, she said nothing. Not yet. She was planning her words carefully, not to embarrass him, but to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Behind the scenes, her staff drafted possible statements, each one more direct than the last. But Jasmine kept deleting, rewriting, refining. She wasn't looking for a viral quote. She was looking for precision. Every word had to matter. Every sentence had to carry weight, because this wasn't just about one argument. It was about a pattern, about how too often confidence is mistaken for competence, and how arrogance so often underestimates intellect. Finally, after days of silence, she decided to speak. It wasn't at a rally, and it wasn't in a TV interview. It was in the same hearing room where it all began. The lights were just as bright, the cameras just as close. But this time, the energy was different. The air was heavy, as if everyone knew something big was about to happen. Jasmine sat across from Johnson again, her expression calm, her voice steady. He tried to look relaxed, but his hands fidgeted on the desk. The audience whispered softly as the moderator gave her the floor. "And then," she began. "You know," she said, pausing just long enough to make him look up. "It's funny how some people think the loudest voice in the room belongs to the smartest person. But I've learned it's usually the opposite." The room went still. No laughter. No movement. Just that slow, dawning silence that happens when the balance shifts. Jasmine didn't raise her tone. She didn't point or glare. She simply looked at him, every word measured, every syllable deliberate. "Mocking a degree doesn't make you intelligent," she continued softly. "It makes you small. And sometimes, small talk is all some people have." You could hear a pin drop. Johnson's face tightened, but he forced a smirk. Still, the damage was done. The power in the room had moved, away from the loudest voice and toward the calmest one. And everyone watching could feel it. In that single exchange, the dynamic flipped. The woman who had been mocked became the one who commanded the moment. She wasn't just answering back, she was redefining what strength looked like. No shouting. No grand gestures. Just quiet confidence and truth delivered like a scalpel, clean, sharp, and unforgettable. The next morning, her words were everywhere. News channels replayed them in slow motion. Commentators called it the moment arrogance met its match. Social feeds were filled with quotes, reactions, and admiration. People weren't cheering because she'd insulted him. They were cheering because she'd shown restraint in a world that rewards outrage. She reminded everyone that intelligence doesn't have to yell to be heard, and while Johnson's team scrambled to recover, trying to frame it as spirited debate, the public had already made up its mind. The clip wasn't just another viral video, it had become a symbol. A reminder that calm can be more powerful than volume, that grace can outlast arrogance, and that the right words spoken at the right time can echo louder than any shout. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just defended herself. She had exposed something bigger, a truth that too many people ignore. That arrogance always underestimates intellect. That confidence without respect is just noise. And that sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is stay composed when others lose control. As the video reached millions of views, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about presence, about what it means to be unshaken in a world built on noise. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't just respond. She rose. The story was far from over. Because what happened next would turn a viral clip into a movement. The calm before the storm was ending. The real reckoning was just beginning. Stay tuned, because what came after would change everything. The next morning, Washington was buzzing. Newsrooms were replaying Jasmine Crockett's quiet words again and again. Commentators called it the calm takedown. Viewers described it as refreshing, even healing. It wasn't just another political exchange. It was a moment that made people stop and think. For once, it wasn't the shouting that got attention. It was the stillness. In coffee shops across the country, people were talking about it. At breakfast tables, in offices, even in barbershops, her name came up. "Did you see that congresswoman?" someone would ask, and others nodded, smiling. She didn't even raise her voice. It felt like something rare had happened, something honest, something human. Mike Johnson, on the other hand, wasn't smiling. Behind closed doors, his team was in full damage control. They told him to stay calm, to ride it out. But the problem was, the more he spoke, the worse it looked. Every new interview reminded people of the silence that had followed his mockery. Every attempt to explain sounded like an excuse. The internet has a long memory, and this story was still climbing. By the second day, the clip had reached millions of views. News outlets from both sides of the aisle were covering it. Some tried to spin it, calling it a misunderstanding, but most people weren't buying that. They had seen the look on his face. They had seen her composure. You can't edit honesty. You can't fake grace. Meanwhile, Jasmine kept doing what she always did. Working. No flashy interviews, no self-promotion, no victory lap. She showed up to meetings, spoke on panels, and handled her district's business as usual. But now, everywhere she went, cameras followed. People wanted to know who she was. Reporters wanted to understand how she had managed to stay so calm in a moment that would have made most people snap. When asked about it during a brief hallway interview, she smiled gently and said, "I just believe you don't have to shout to make a point." That line alone exploded online. Within hours, it became a quote plastered across social media posts, news graphics, and motivational videos. It wasn't just politics anymore, it was a message. A reminder that strength can sound like stillness. While she went on about her work, something bigger began happening online. Supporters started posting old clips of her courtroom arguments, her speeches from state legislature days, her interviews where she talked about fairness and respect. People saw that this wasn't a one-time moment. This was who she had always been, calm, prepared, unshaken, and the more they saw, the more they respected her. She became a symbol for every person who had ever been interrupted, mocked, or underestimated. Comment sections filled with messages from teachers, nurses, parents, and retirees. "I wish I had her patience. That's how you handle arrogance." She didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for all of us. For Mike Johnson, it was a different story. Each day brought another wave of reminders. Late-night hosts joked about the 5-second silence that lasted forever. Editorial cartoons showed him shrinking behind a desk while Crockett stood tall. Even his own supporters started avoiding questions about the incident. The confidence that once filled every room he entered now felt fragile, uncertain. In private, his advisors urged him to apologize, or at least acknowledge her. But pride is a heavy chain. Instead of humility, he chose distance. He brushed it off, saying he didn't pay attention to internet noise. But everyone knew. He'd heard it all. And sometimes, silence speaks louder than any apology could. Weeks passed, yet the moment refused to fade. It kept resurfacing every time a new political argument turned nasty. People would say, "Remember how Crockett handled Johnson?" Her name became shorthand for control under pressure. She wasn't just winning arguments. She was changing how people thought about them. Eventually, major networks began inviting her for interviews, not about the confrontation, but about leadership, communication, and dignity. She spoke softly, never mentioning Johnson by name. "It's not about who said what," she explained. "It's about remembering that respect isn't optional." Every word carried that same balance, steady, real, grounded. Audiences loved her. They said she made politics feel human again. There was no shouting, no rehearsed outrage. Just truth told simply, and for an older generation watching from their living rooms, that simplicity hit home. They were tired of noise, tired of the fighting, tired of leaders who thought volume meant vision. Crockett gave them something different, the kind of steady honesty that reminded them of how leadership used to sound. By now, even people who didn't follow politics knew her name. She became the calm in the storm, a quiet force in a loud world. Commentators started calling it the Crockett effect. It meant winning without yelling, speaking without fear, and showing that intelligence doesn't need permission to be strong. The phrase caught on. You could see it printed on mugs, quoted in articles, whispered in classrooms. The idea that composure could be power was spreading. And the best part? Jasmine didn't change. She stayed the same. No new slogans. No attention-grabbing stunts. Just consistent grace under pressure. When asked how she felt about becoming an internet phenomenon, she laughed softly. "I didn't plan it," she said. "I just did my job." That humility made people love her more. Because in a world where everyone wants to be seen, She showed that sometimes being respected is better than being noticed. But while her star was rising, Johnson's was fading. His next few appearances were awkward, full of forced smiles and stiff answers. He avoided mentioning her, but the shadow of that day followed him everywhere. You could see it in the way interviewers paused before asking a question. You could feel it in the room when someone brought up the topic of composure. It was as if everyone knew, but nobody needed to say it. He'd lost something that day that no headline could repair. Political insiders whispered that the incident had reshaped his image. Some said it was unfair. Others said it was overdue. But either way, the truth was clear. Arrogance had met its match. And humility had won. Crockett's calm had become a mirror, reflecting everything wrong with loud leadership and everything right about quiet strength. And every time the clip replayed online, more people saw it, understood it, and shared it. What began as a viral video was now a symbol of something much bigger. A change in tone, a shift in values, a new kind of respect. She started receiving letters, thousands of them, from people across the country. Veterans, teachers, single parents, young women in college. They thanked her for staying composed, for showing that dignity could still win in a world addicted to noise. She read as many as she could, and sometimes late at night she'd pause and smile at one or two lines that stood out. "You made me proud to be quiet," one letter said. "You made me believe silence can be strength." In those moments, she understood that what had happened wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been talked over, underestimated, or dismissed. She hadn't planned to start a movement, but maybe, just maybe, one had started anyway. And as her influence grew, the same question began circling the media. Would Jasmine Crockett respond again? Would she ever speak directly about Mike Johnson? Viewers waited. Journalists speculated. Commentators guessed. But she said nothing. She had learned that the best follow-up to a moment of power isn't noise. It's progress. While she worked quietly on new policies and community programs, the internet buzzed with predictions. Some said she'd make a big speech. Others thought she'd release a book. Nobody knew what she'd do next. But everyone was watching, because deep down, people sensed it. The story wasn't over. The silence that once protected her was now building toward something even bigger. The calm before the storm had passed. What came next would shake more than one reputation. It would test how far quiet power could really go. And as the world waited, one thing was certain. Jasmine Crockett wasn't done yet. The best was still to come. As the days turned into weeks, one thing became clear. Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman. She was a message. Her silence, her calm, her control had become something people could feel. Everywhere you looked, someone was talking about her. It wasn't just political news anymore. It was cultural. It was personal. It was about dignity and how rare it had become in a world that never stops shouting. Clips of her quiet response played on every major network. Talk shows couldn't get enough of it. Analysts broke it down frame by frame, studying the tilt of her head, the softness of her tone, the pause before she spoke. "This," one commentator said, "is how leadership looks when it's not trying too hard." And for once, people agreed across lines that rarely meet. Conservatives, liberals, independents, young and old. Everyone saw something real in her. At first, Jasmine didn't understand the full reach of what had happened. She was still showing up for committee meetings, attending events, writing policy drafts like always. But each time she walked into a room, something had changed. People looked up. Conversations paused. Staffers smiled wider. Reporters leaned in. Respect had replaced recognition. It wasn't about fame, it was about presence. Her team started receiving invitations from universities, conferences, and organizations all over the country. Everyone wanted her to speak. They wanted to hear from the woman who had turned silence into power. But Jasmine chose carefully. She didn't want to become a symbol for one moment. She wanted to build something lasting. Her goal wasn't to go viral again. It was to remind people that grace still matters. When she did accept invitations, her words were simple and steady. "It's not about proving someone wrong," she said once at a women's leadership summit. "It's about proving that respect can still win." The audience, made up mostly of middle-aged professionals and college students, rose to their feet. It wasn't a wild cheer. It was quiet, powerful applause. The kind that comes from agreement deep in the heart. Across the country, people began using her as an example. In offices, when tempers rose during meetings, someone would whisper, "Be like Crockett." In classrooms, teachers showed the clip to explain the difference between reaction and response. In churches and community centers, her story became a sermon about patience, purpose, and power. Meanwhile, Mike Johnson's silence was growing louder. He had tried to move past the moment, but it followed him everywhere. During interviews, journalists found subtle ways to bring it up. "What did you learn from that exchange?" one anchor asked. His smile was tight. "We're all human," he said, forcing a chuckle. But viewers could see through it. The confidence he once wore so easily now seemed brittle. The more he tried to sound unaffected, the more people remembered the moment he'd been. Inside the halls of Congress, whispers spread. Some colleagues quietly admired Crockett. Others avoided eye contact when Johnson entered a room. Politics thrives on perception, and perception had shifted. The man once known for dominating debates now struggled to reclaim his footing. Power had changed hands, not through shouting or scandal, but through a single calm moment of truth. For Jasmine, though, it was never about revenge. In private, she rarely mentioned Johnson's name. To her, the real story wasn't about who lost. It was about what people learned. She told her staff, "Let's use this attention to talk about something that matters." And that's exactly what they did. They used the spotlight to highlight justice reforms, education programs, and mentorship for young women entering law and politics. Every interview turned into an opportunity for progress. Every soundbite pointed forward, not backward. That's when the media gave her a new title, the Voice of Reason. It wasn't official, but it stuck. People liked it because it fit. In a sea of noise, she was the calm they could trust. News anchors described her as measured, thoughtful, fearless, without being loud. Viewers, especially those in their 50s and 60s, saw something familiar in her. She reminded them of leaders from another time, steady, humble, accountable. And yet, Jasmine never let the praise go to her head. When a reporter once asked how it felt to be the calmest person in Congress, she smiled and said, "Maybe I'm just trying to be the most honest." That line spread like wildfire because it felt pure. It sounded like something people had been waiting to hear. While she rose higher, Johnson's circle shrank. A few loyal voices still defended him, saying he'd been unfairly criticized, but even they sounded tired. The energy had shifted. The story was no longer about what he'd said. It was about what she represented. People were quoting her more than they were quoting presidents. And the truth was, she had touched something deeper than politics. She had reminded people that leadership can be kind without being weak, calm without being passive, and firm without being cruel. As her influence grew, she began mentoring younger women in law and government. Many came to her unsure, saying they were afraid of being called too quiet or too emotional. Jasmine would smile gently and say, "Let them call you what they want. Just make sure they also call you right." That small line carried big meaning. It started showing up on posters, on phone screens, in classrooms. Everywhere people needed courage to stay composed. Soon, even late-night hosts stopped joking about her. Instead, they praised her. One said, "We could use a little more Jasmine and a lot less noise in politics." The audience applauded softly. They knew exactly what he meant. Meanwhile, the world outside politics was changing too. Businesses started inviting her to speak about communication. Schools used her story to teach emotional intelligence. Social media creators made edits comparing her calm tone to viral outbursts from other politicians. Captioned with one simple phrase, "Control is power." Each version drew millions of views. Through it all, Jasmine stayed grounded. She often said her success came from discipline, not talent. "You can't control how people treat you," she told one interviewer, "but you can control how you respond. That's where your real power is." It was a line so simple, yet so true, that it became the heart of her message. People quoted it like a mantra. By now, even those who once doubted her began to respect her. Lawmakers who had ignored her earlier started listening. Opponents who used to interrupt her began to hesitate before speaking. Something about her presence changed the temperature of every room she entered. She didn't have to demand attention anymore. It found her naturally, and still, she stayed quiet about Mike Johnson. The silence wasn't avoidance, it was strength. Because everyone already knew what she had proven, there was nothing left to say. Sometimes silence is not absence. It's authority, but then something unexpected happened. One evening, a new interview with Johnson aired. He looked older, tired, reflective. When asked about Jasmine Crockett, he paused longer than anyone expected. "She handled herself well," he admitted quietly. "Better than I did." The comment was small, almost lost in the flow of conversation, but the internet noticed. People shared it instantly. Maybe, they said, even he finally understood. The moment made headlines again, and just like that, the story reignited. Not as a feud, but as a full-circle lesson. People called it redemption, others called it awareness. But either way, it showed something rare: growth. And perhaps that was the real win. Jasmine, when asked to respond to his comment, smiled the same calm smile she always had. "We all learn," she said simply. "That's what matters. No anger, no pride, just peace." And that answer, soft, clear, mature, reminded the world once more why she had captured so many hearts. But as the conversation grew, so did the expectations. People wanted more. They wanted to know what she would do next. Would she run for higher office? Would she take her message beyond Congress? Her supporters were ready. Her critics were nervous. And everyone was watching. Because this wasn't just a story about politics anymore. It was a story about respect, about the power of composure, and about how one quiet moment could echo across an entire nation. The movement she never planned was now shaping her future, and possibly the country's. The stage was set. The silence had turned into strength, and the world was waiting to see just how far that strength could go. Because what came next wouldn't just make headlines, it would make history. As the headlines faded and the world moved on to new controversies, something about Jasmine Crockett's story refused to disappear. It lingered, quiet, steady, undeniable. Her calm had become a symbol, her silence a lesson. People didn't just remember what she said anymore. They remembered how she made them feel. And that's what lasts. Months passed, and her influence only deepened. College campuses held panels in her honor. Law professors used her story as a case study in communication and ethics. Even leadership coaches began teaching the Crockett method, a style built on control, composure, and compassion. She had become more than a name. She was now a mindset. Meanwhile, in Washington, her presence carried new weight. When she entered a hearing, the tone shifted. Voices softened. Arguments cooled. Colleagues listened more. Some called it respect. Others called it awareness. But everyone knew it was real. You couldn't fake that kind of power. It came from consistency, from authenticity, from being the same person whether the cameras were rolling or not. Her critics tried to downplay it. They said she'd had a lucky moment, but even they spoke carefully now. Because every time someone tried to mock her, the internet reminded them of what happened the last time someone did. That clip, that calm, steady, unforgettable exchange, was now part of political history. Students studied it. Speakers quoted it. And every replay carried the same message. Arrogance fades, composure lasts. But while the world praised her, Jasmine stayed focused on her mission. She wasn't chasing fame or power. She was chasing purpose. She started new initiatives to help young people from underrepresented communities study law. She pushed for reforms that would make government more transparent and fair. And she kept reminding her supporters that change doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with patience. Her team called her schedule relentless, but she called it service. Every meeting, every interview, every speech had intention behind it. She once told a group of students, "Real progress doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from showing up the longest." That line stuck. People shared it everywhere, on posters, on mugs, in morning radio shows. It was simple, but it hit home. The more she spoke, the more people realized she wasn't just strong in that one viral moment. She had always been strong. That day with Mike Johnson had simply revealed it to the world. It wasn't a performance. It was proof. Proof that grace isn't weakness. Proof that calm isn't surrender. Proof that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who truly understands power. Across the country, people were changing how they saw strength. In workplaces, managers began holding calm communication trainings inspired by her. In classrooms, teachers played her video to show how control can defeat chaos. Even families at dinner tables quoted her lines about respect and restraint. What had started as a political moment had turned into a cultural movement. And yet, through all of it, Jasmine never changed her tone. She spoke softly, moved deliberately, and treated every question like it deserved thought. She laughed when asked about her fame, saying, "If calmness is famous now, maybe that's a good thing." Audiences loved her even more for it. Because she didn't act like a celebrity, she acted like a leader. Then, one night, something special happened. She was invited to speak at a national conference about leadership and integrity. The room was full: senators, students, journalists, veterans, business owners, and ordinary citizens. Everyone wanted to hear from the woman who had redefined what leadership looks like. She walked to the stage without notes, just that same quiet confidence. The crowd went silent, waiting. She paused, smiled, and began. "When I was younger," she said, "I thought power meant being heard. I thought it meant speaking louder, arguing harder, standing taller. But I learned something along the way. Power isn't volume. It's vision. It's knowing who you are, even when someone tries to make you forget." You could feel the energy in the room shift. People leaned in. She continued, "Sometimes people mistake calm for weakness. They think silence means surrender. But silence, when used with purpose, is strength. It's focus. It's clarity. And that's something no one can take from you." The audience sat still, hanging on every word. No music, no shouting, no big gestures, just truth. The kind of truth that touches something inside you and stays there. She ended her speech with a sentence that would echo across the internet for weeks. "Never let someone's noise drown out your knowledge. Because when you know who you are, you don't need to raise your voice. The world will raise it for you." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in a standing ovation that grew slowly, like a wave of quiet respect. Cameras flashed. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. But Jasmine didn't bask in it. She simply nodded, thanked the audience, and walked off stage with the same calm she walked in with. It was the perfect full circle. The same composure that silenced arrogance now inspired admiration. Outside the conference hall, a reporter caught up to her and asked, "Congresswoman Crockett, do you think that moment with Mike Johnson is what started all this?" She smiled softly and said, "Maybe. But I think the real story isn't how it started. It's how it changed people." Then she got into her car, waved to a small crowd of supporters, and drove off into the night, calm, steady, unbothered. The same as always. Back in Washington, Mike Johnson watched the clip of her speech on TV. He didn't say a word. He just nodded slightly, as if acknowledging what everyone already knew. She had won, not through noise or pride, but through quiet endurance. The kind that outlasts time. In the months that followed, her legacy grew. Young leaders quoted her. Schools taught her story. And in every corner of the country, people began to believe something new. That respect and composure are not old-fashioned. They're timeless. And maybe that's the real lesson here. That strength doesn't always look like dominance. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it sounds like silence. And sometimes it simply stands tall, calm, and unshaken, waiting for the noise to fade so truth can finally be heard. Because in the end, Jasmine Crockett didn't just respond to arrogance. She redefined what it means to lead. She didn't win through power. She won through presence. And that presence, quiet, confident, unforgettable, will echo long after the cameras stop rolling. So if you ever find yourself in a room full of noise, remember her story. Remember how she sat still while others shouted. Remember how silence became strength. And remember that sometimes the loudest sound in history is calm, because when the noise fades, the truth still stands. And Jasmine Crockett, she's still standing, and that is the story of how one moment of calm changed everything. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight with anger. She stood firm, stayed focused, and proved that real strength doesn't need to shout to be heard. In a world full of noise, she reminded us that silence, when it comes from wisdom, can be louder than any argument, that patience isn't weakness, that grace is power. Maybe that's what we all need to remember right now, that respect still matters, that words still carry weight, and that sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one that changes it forever. If this story moved you, even a little, then take a second to support the message. Hit the like button to help more people see this story. Comment below. Tell us what you think true strength looks like, and if you believe calm and truth still have a place in this world. Subscribe, because we're bringing you more real stories that remind us what leadership, respect, and composure truly mean. Thank you for watching. Stay calm, stay kind, and remember, silence isn't empty. It's full of power. I'm your host, and this is where calm speaks louder than noise.